at that age. And then from there, I went to Seattle for a week or so, a few days, and then I was shipped off to Peru, where what they did was, the long story short, out of that entire program, they cranked out a bunch of kids that were prepubescent children, and they would give us an IV in our arm and give us a drug that would bring us near to death. And when we were near to death, they could ask us questions, and other intelligences would speak through us. And so they were using us. I was on shipments of drugs from Porto to Huantinsuyo, Peru, to Santa Marta, Colombia. There was an airplane full of cocaine once a month that flew, and they would put me on the plane and put me under. And during that time, they could ask if there was police or bad weather, and they would get accurate answers. So if you think about why we can't win the war on drugs, you got to look at what the other side's using. And this is like high-end CIA black ops stuff. But that's what they did, and I did that for a couple summers down there, and then I started to eventually lose the ability. The guy that put me under, after 5 or 6 trips, he had an entire notebook of questions from people in the town. Like, they told everybody about me. I was a brujo, if I'm saying it right, like a warlock is what they referred to me. And the kids would stay away from me and stuff. It was a very sad. I was a very broken child at that time, but and there was an essence of family in Peru. I missed it. I missed that town for the rest of the 20 years, and I still do.
And so the dynamic is you were taken Thursday night. They got your agreement. In the book, you actually talked about them inserting some kind of needle, yeah, like by the eye socket, and
right in the tear duct,
and pulling out your consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And then, please.
So I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm so sorry.
No,
but
I'm
excited.
We're here to hear you talk.
Well, it's like it's neat to meet somebody that read the book, and so we can go back and forth really quick. Yeah, so they did a test. They actually did a medical test on me to find the dominant eye. And then the needle went in the tear duct of the dominant eye is what they did. And the feeling was like, obviously, like they stuck a needle in there, but it felt like I got punched. When you see stars from being punched, I saw stars from it. I saw the same. Hopefully everybody listening can't relate to what I'm saying by being punched in the eye by a grown man as hard as he can. And so where you see stars, hopefully most of you can't bring up the visual, but for those of you that can, it was like they stuck a needle in my eye, and it was the same exact experience as being punched in the eye, bam. And then I woke up with no memory of where I was. And so I believe I kind of theorized, because I don't know for sure, but I theorized that it was a clone, that it was a cloned body. And because it had no memories in it, because I woke up, I was taken out of my body, put into the clone body, and that body was a blank slate. So they had, like the speech came with me slightly, but I didn't have memories of mom and dad or Michigan or anywhere that I didn't. And then, and the thing that kind of really put a stamp on it was that at the end of the 20 years, when they put me back, when I woke up, it was the same procedure, but I woke up back into 10 years old with my memories. So it was as if I went from that body into the original body. And I forgot those memories of those 20 years. And I remembered the memories that were gone from mom and dad in Michigan. I hope I'm explaining it to where you guys can, because explaining it to me is one thing because I lived it. I have memory of it. Explaining it to people so to get their head around it is difficult for me sometimes.
So this is great. And folks, right? We're journeying this, when this happened, the honest truth is you began to exist in 2 places simultaneously for the next 20 years of your life. And that is another area to explore. But to keep the conversation kind of flowing, I want to just talk about the clone experience. Because that, oh my gosh, there's a lot. So when you say you were, taken to this portable room in Inyo Kern, and there was, some programming that was done there, that was to a clone body with you in it. Then they took you to this house in a clone body. Then they took you to Peru. You're actually doing this work for the people that are trafficking you over international boundaries in an airplane in a clone body. And I just want to get my audience to understand that because I believe you. And actually, I work with a lot of people who have and are struggling to understand why clone stuff comes up with them so much. Because there's a lack of like context for the conversation. You have a lot of context. You're like, no, they suck me out. I'm in there. I go on a 20-year tour in a clone body or several. I mean, we'll get to that. But, you know, you're doing all of this. Wow. So you actually had some good memories of what you did in the clone body in South America.
Yes. Well, I was a broken kid, but I was being taken care of. I had a handler and he had a family, and his mom really took to me and she took care of me. And out of the whole 20 years, that was the time in Peru was the time that I felt most welcomed and like a family atmosphere, like loved. So that was something that stood out to me. And like I said, I missed it when I left. I always intended to return. I've looked into going back there. So something I was going to say earlier that I didn't say was that in 2016, I went back to the house in Seattle. I booked a flight and I went straight to Seattle. As soon, I got my memories back and I found it on Google Earth. I had to go there, and I worked with the researcher for a while, but I went back in September of 16. I went to the house, and it was a freaky experience because I knew, not only did I know the area, but I was seeing things like, oh, that's new. Like, wow, that gas station wasn't there. They built that here. And oh, there's that old place that's changed. And like I had that kind of recollection. I actually got a hold of some researchers, the researcher I was working with, and I said, look, if my memories of Seattle are this accurate, they're freakishly accurate. I went into the general store and I knew my way around. I knew where the candy was. I went to the beach there and I knew where the rocks were, where you couldn't see them. I said, right up there is where the bigger rocks are. And I was on the phone with the researcher the whole time. But and I said to him, I said, man, if the memories of Seattle are this accurate, I have to trust the memories of space. So, the space of when I was sold into the program, in the space program. So I have to trust that those memories are just as accurate. I can't say, because it's not like I came here and I was fuzzy and I only got a couple things right. Like I'm freakishly accurate. When I drove to the house, I flew to Seattle and I stayed the night at some hotel in town in Seattle, and I didn't know my way around. So I was Google mapping everywhere. I rented a car, and then the next day I drove down and drove over to the ferry that I always remembered. So I always remembered going to the ferry back and forth. And this is something that I talked to my mom about when I was a kid. And I had no idea. I was like, where is the ferry? Like whatever. I'm not going to say the name on the thing, but where's this ferry at? She's like, I don't know, Tony, but why do you keep talking about it? But I went there and I said, this is the name. I had the names right from when I was, like it was a bleed through memory that happened. Rode the ferry. And I Google mapped the way to the house because I'd found it on Google Earth. So I had the address and I put it into the Google Maps. But when I got into town, the maps were taking me straight. And I said, no, it's that way. Like I went, oh, it's this way. And I turned with the way that I remember. When I got to the house, it turned out that Google was taking me over a quarter mile of dirt road. And the way that I went was a quarter mile longer, but it was all pavement. It was the way we drove to the house. Everybody avoided the dirt road. But Google was going to take me on a short stint over dirt road. Like I actually knew the correct route over what the map was telling me. If you understand what that kind of experience was for somewhere that I'd never been, that I could prove that I'd never been. So that was absolutely. And then before I got to the house, there was pine trees coming. I said, and I remember as a kid riding in the car with her, she would take us to the store. And we'd always say, oh, we're almost there now when we saw the pine trees. And when I was driving up, I went, oh, we're almost there now. And then it was only 100 yards up was the house, the gate to the house. And I just was like devastated that it was all real. Like I wanted it to be wrong. I wanted it all to not be, because I witnessed absolutely terrible things. So I would say this to anybody listening also, is that my book is not it's not a Star Trek episode. There's no happy ending. There's no, you know what I mean? It's difficult. The Jackie Kenner, who edited it with me in the very beginning, put it down, moved away. She said, Tony, I gotta let you go. We were on a Zoom call. She said, we'll talk tomorrow. And she went outside and threw up. because of what we were talking about, because of the book. And it, and I told her, I said, look, I understand if you don't want to work with me anymore on this. And she said, no. She's like, this is why, that's the very reason why we have to get it done, is because this is real, because this stuff did happen to you, and they did this to kids, and they're out there doing it now. This is, the world works under these systems. So that's why we don't understand the world. I say it like this. I've said this in interviews. If your leaders are passing laws that are inhumane, then maybe they're not human.
We'll get to that. Can you talk a little bit about Inyo Kern? What happened there?
Well, I'll try not to drop names. What, I've dug up an absolutely mountain of evidence around what I remembered in Inyo Kern and the projects around, because the CIA declassified the programs after the whatever X amount of years, 25 years. We started out, we were watching movies. They had like a heavy, they were a mix of cartoons and newsreels of like Vietnam combat footage, and then it would go to a Disney cartoon to Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, and it would go to animals being butchered, and then it would flash heavy. They gave us drugs. They gave us like a hallucinogen, and we had helmets on that would shock us as the movie, like it would shock you in a certain pattern, and then as the movie changed, it would shock you in a different way. Like it would go from a cartoon to an animal being butchered, for instance. And I don't want to be too graphic. I mean, right? But and then the shock would change. So they were changing the way you thought. And that went on for a long time. And then they started with sleep deprivation. They would take us in and hurt us, and then put us back on the movie and then ask us at the end of every day. The kids were called in one by one to the doctor. We called him the doctor, and he would ask us, how do you feel about the movie today? He was the entire time, he made a report. He asked us questions and made a report on what we were thinking. But at a certain point, and this is also a piece of evidence for the people, because there's a group of people that did research into remote viewing that had a certain personnel that invented sleep deprivation, forms of mind control for people. But they began with sleep deprivation, where every 15 minutes an alarm would go off and the lights would come on, and we had to stand up next to our bed, and they'd come by and slap us, and we could go back to they'd smack you hard in the face, you'd go back to sleep, or they'd come by with a cattle prod and zap you, and then you could go back to sleep. And then 15 minutes later, it would start all over again. And once that happened, I lost all track of time. I worked with researchers. How long were you there? Looking back at it now, I remember that I got in Peru, and there was a kid that had an 82 t-shirt, and they were making fun of him. So it was like January. They had just did New Year's. So by the time I got to Peru, they had just had New Year's Eve, and it was 83. So that means April of 82 till November or so is how long I was in Inyo Kern of that year, and then shipped off to Seattle for a week, about maybe 2 weeks, a week or 2 weeks, and then to Peru. Excuse me. So I mean, after it was all said and done, after the sleep deprivation, they tested us. There was an aptitude, and they were testing us, and we passed. We couldn't. He said, I didn't think you guys had it in you. You're going to be theta. So it was a echelon. It was a chapter, and we were all qualified for theta. And he began with psychic experiments, meditation. They were teaching us. We got to sleep, and then he was doing. We were getting techniques that I found from the Monroe Institute. So, and I don't want to incriminate them, because I think that the Monroe Institute binaural programs of meditation and out of body, I think they're very important, and I don't want to demonize them. But there were personnel that were well versed in the Monroe Institute form of out of body that were working alongside in this program, and so we did do the Monroe curriculum for good to go out of body and remote view. But they were giving us minerals. It wasn't like drugs, because they would make us drink a cocktail, but I didn't feel that I had a buzz from it. So it was something else that enhanced the ability. And then we would had big headphones, and they were putting on the binaural, and then we had a targets. We went out. They